Called a round hat shape, which is a new style hat. If you know the portraits of George Washington, he's wearing a hat that's shaped on three sides called a cocked hat. That has totally gone out of style. There's another thing that's really different here too, his hair length. He's got short hair. And this has now become the style. Even in the military, which is always the bastion of conservatism, by 1803, even the British Army gives up the queue and long hair. He's wearing turned-down boots, which become very fashionable. And what I want to talk about, this is also a period, as we're talking, where clothes are becoming modern and streamlined. And there's a whole new force in effect, because after the monarchy in France falls, a whole new look and cut comes in, the streamlined look. Well, this goes one step further, and there's another revolution that goes on in England. And the leader of that revolution is a man named Beau Brummel. And Beau Brummel looks at what men had been wearing traditionally with all the embroidery and the gilt work and the bright colors and the silks, and decides that there's colors that every gentleman should have in their wardrobe. Buff or khaki color, dark blue, black, gray, and brown. How many of you guys have one of those colors someplace in your wardrobe closet? Show of hands. Let's see. Come on, guys. Anyone got khaki pants? How many guys? How many have a blue blazer tucked away someplace? How many of them have brass buttons on it? Hey, this is where it started. And he befriended the Prince Regent, which replaced King George, and it became all the rage to wear that clothing. And I want to make a point here that we tend today with the fashion industry to look at Paris as being the place where all the trends are set. Well, that was true under court, but with the revolution they wanted to throw everything away. And if you look at all the French fashion magazines of the time, they talk about fashion being la anglaise and in the English style. So the English are really the trendsetters at this time. So this civilian fashion often represents military fashion and vice versa. We're always sharing back and forth. So the next up we have is an American regular Army officer. And frankly, if you look at this gentleman, he has very similar lines. If we have Captain Shaw turn here, he's got that short, sensible coat. He's got the small back. He's wearing a chapeau bras. That is a hat that's designed to be taken off the head and worn or carried under the arm very conveniently. Jim, when you take your hat off, what do you do with it when you go indoors? It's difficult to do anything, whereas Eric can take his hat off and he can put it under his arm. Anyone that's watched the great BBC presentation, Pride and Prejudice, you'll notice when they go to the one ball, both the gentlemen are wearing a chapeau just like this. Have a question?
What is the on the silver?
This?
Yeah.
That's a breastplate. And that's a decorative item that goes all the way back to armored knights. It's one of the last things that still exists in a military uniform is somewhat armored.
What are those like dangle things, like at his arm?
Are we looking here?
Yeah, like all that.
Well, I'll get to that in a little bit. He's an officer, and the way you can tell he's an officer are a couple different things. One, he has bullion on him. He's wearing silver bullion, which indicates he's probably an infantry officer. Almost every army in the world except the French, if you're wearing silver, you're probably infantry. If you're wearing gold, you're an engineer, a staff officer, or artillery officer. He also has a silk crimson sash here. That is something that, again, is a carryover from an earlier period where officers during the English Civil War would wear different colored sashes to show what allegiance they are. Well, in the U.S. Army and even in the British Army, these crimson sashes are a symbol of rank. Other things that we can see on him are silvered buttons and silver tape. He's got a very modern, stylish look with the trousers he's wearing. You might also see a civilian wearing a style like this. It has what we call Austrian knots on it, and it actually ends to look like it's short boots, but it's actually the bottom of his trousers. This is a very popular style, a hussar style that's worn by both gentlemen in court and army officers. Next up, we have a young musician. I'm going to talk about Owen a little bit. What would be the first thing you'd think with him wearing a red coat? British. Right. That's most people think he's British. The reality is musicians in this time period are very, very important. They are essentially the field radio of the time. And because of the field radio, you need to be able to find them quickly. So that officer wants to look amongst his soldiers, which are all wearing blue coats, and find the music right away. Because the soldiers are taught to wake up, go to bed, eat, have church detail, punishment, wood detail, everything by the beat of the drum and the fife music. So as a result, that officer has to identify him very quickly. And as a result, Owen is wearing a similar type hat called the chapeau. He's wearing reversed colors of what I wear. He's wearing a red coat with blue facings instead of a red coat or a blue coat with red facings. He's carrying his fife in the fife case. And if he was a drummer, he'd be carrying a decorated drum like this. John? Next up, we have a regular... Yes, ma'am? All right, we can do that starting with Jim if you want to take a walk down the aisle. I'm sorry. Again, if you take a look at the back of his coat in particular, look how well that fits. And that's a new style. 20 years earlier, that would be a much baggier coat with really full tails, and it wouldn't show the gentleman's physique very well. You could actually hide underneath that. Yes, ma'am?
Would that be like rich man or just a common man?
Actually, again, in the New Republic, it's getting harder and harder to tell what his position is. Chances are he would be middle class. On the frontier, you might still own some clothes like that, but never wear it except a special day like a marriage or an election or church service. Typically on the East Coast, we would have seen men all over wearing clothing like this. Eric's uniform again has some of the same sensible cut to it. He's also wearing kid gloves, which gentlemen would normally wear in public. And Owen is actually wearing spatterdashes or gaiters in imitation of boots. And you'll see all kinds of people wear this, including tradesmen, farmers, fishermen. And it's because the shoes have low quarters, and by wearing that it keeps stones and things out of your shoes and also protects the bottom of your trousers because there's not very many paved roads. Got a question?
What is the little, yes, that, yes.
Oh, that is a watch fob, and he has a timepiece in there. Timepieces are becoming much more reasonable to get. We've got the Industrial Revolution, and most gentlemen will wear a nice fob to show that they have a watch. Sometimes these have various symbols or signets on it to do wax sealings on your letters. You might see a Mason and have a Masonic symbol on there. But you see that in all the fashion plates at the time. Even Army officers would normally carry a pocket watch with a fob like that. So what we have here is the U.S. regular Army at the outbreak of the War of 1812. This is what a soldier would have looked like that garrisoned the fort in Detroit that surrendered. The 4th U.S. Infantry would have been dressed like this. This is still kind of a transition uniform in that it's closed with hooks and eyes. These buttons are just decoration. And this really goes back to the 18th century when all uniforms, like mine, were hook and eyed with lapels on the front. He's also wearing a new fashioned hat. I'm wearing a round hat just like Jim, but mine's in felt. This is called a round hat or a common hat. Well, if I take this hat and I cut the brim down, I end up with this poke, it's called, just like a baseball hat. This is a modern style hat that becomes known as a shako. And this hat is all the rage in Europe, and all the European armies are wearing it. They decorate it or embellish it with various cords of different colors. They put plumes on it, in many cases decorative cap plates in the front. This imitation buttonhole here, again, that's simply decoration. That goes away during the war because it's more time and expense. He's wearing cotton trousers, which are easy to clean and easy to replace and inexpensive. And all of his leathers are black. If you want to take a walk down the aisle. He's also wearing a short, sensible coat. He would normally wear also a haversack, a canteen, a backpack, and spatterdashes. So he might appear like that for morning parade at places like Detroit or Fort Dearborn in Chicago. Phil here is wearing a summer utilitarian version of the same thing. And white, like Erica mentioned, is very popular because A, there's a big cotton industry emerging. Cotton, linen, and flax are used for work and summer clothing because you can wash it. And a soldier gets pretty dirty. And in the southern part of the United States, they actually issue these same jackets without tails called round jackets. You'd see a wagoneer, a woodsman, a craftsman wearing a short jacket just like this, sometimes in color, sometimes in wool, but the Army issued them also. He's also wearing the sensible round hat, and if he turns the back, you can see, like any soldier, he's burdened with his backpack that has shirt, socks, maybe a Bible, shaving kit, sewing kit, a blanket. He's got a cartridge box that carries 24 rounds of ammunition, a canteen that carries water, and he has a haversack that probably has some greasy rations, so if this was a little more realistic, it'd probably be a nasty thing with flies all around it. You want to walk down the aisle, Phil? He's also wearing whitened belts. That's called buff leather belt, which was a very durable type leather. We don't see buff leather, true buff leather anymore, because part of the process actually uses sperm oil from whales for it. It was the first choice for the Army because you could whiten it with pipe clay to keep it clean, but it was all replaced by black bridle leather. Yes?
What's on the top of, like, their hats? Like, on his hat, the baseball cap on?
Well, we had a question about what's on the hats, and we see feathers. And these various feathers mean different things in different armies, and it also has not only some significance as far as identifying what their function is and who they are, but in the infantry, it can also have a tactical advantage. So basically, white is pretty typical for infantry. In the British Army, white is also worn by their grenadiers or their elites. If you were to see that as a red and white combination, that would be the regular line infantry. If it was red, it's probably artillery, and that's pretty much the same for every European army. One of the things is that with this, in this time period with smoothbore muskets, they're not aiming at a man in particular. There's soldiers lined up elbow to elbow, and you're aiming at center of mass, about where the chest is. And so if you're not aiming for a part of the human, but at the center of it, and you see a long line of men, if I have my hat off, my center of mass is right here. As soon as I put a tall hat on with the feather, all of a sudden my center of mass visually moves up. If I have a weapon with a heavy trigger pull, I might actually jerk the trigger, and if I'm not aiming here, but I'm aiming here, and I jerk the trigger, the ball might actually miss. And if you visit Waterloo, Belgium, and see all the artifact cap plates that came out of the ground with holes in it, I always like to think those are the lucky guys, the ones that just got a hat shot.
What's the rope on the top of the gun?
She's asking for this embellishment on here. It's called a shako cord. And this is just an embellishment that comes into vogue with this type of hat. As I mentioned, Europe had been in continuous warfare for 22 years. And under that 22 years time, if you watch, clothing styles change. And like any army in the world, whoever's winning, everybody copies. That's why in the 1870s, the U.S. Army had a spiked helmet. We looked like Germans. It's because the Germans defeated the French, and we said, hey, if they won, maybe we should dress like them. Well, the same thing happened then. When the French were beating everybody, everybody wanted to look French. When they started losing, everybody wanted to look British. The U.S. Army suffers from, as a young republic, this same problem, where if we look at this uniform, 1811, it's very French-looking. When we look at this uniform, which is roughly 1812, 1813, the British are starting to win in Europe, and miraculously, our fashion starts to go more Anglo again. The United States is very conservative. What does it cost? How do you raise an army, first of all? What does it take? Taxes. Taxes and money. So every army in the world, for the most part, has a uniform in either red, white, or blue. Why do you think that is?
Because those are the American colors.
That's what everyone always says, but ironically it's because of cheap cloth. What could possibly be the cheapest color out of red, white, and blue?
White.
White. It's undyed. Well, the French got there first at the beginning of the 18th century, and their huge army was all dressed in white. The next two processes, which are very inexpensive, is one stage dyeing with indigo to give you blue, and then madder red for red. Well, in England, they had a good trading relationship with the Dutch, who had lots of madder to sell them. Madder makes red. So the Cromwellian armies bought lots of cheap red cloth, really coining that color to become the red coat as we know it today. Blue, the Prussians used. Well, in the early part of colonization in this country, we were basically English-speaking people, and we had defeated the French, the Dutch, and the Spanish in this hemisphere. And as a result, provincial troops, that means troops raised in North America, some people never born in Europe, primarily wore British-style uniforms, usually of all red or red with green or blue facings. Well, with the war with France, when the British government, the Crown, sent all the British regulars to this country, they were wearing red uniforms, the red coats, with various facing colors, typically blue, especially for royal troops. That caused confusion, and the professional British Army officers really hated the fact that provincial officers were dressed just like them. It became the norm to reverse the colors to what I'm wearing. One of the earliest portraits of George Washington by Peale, he's wearing a blue coat with red facings as a Virginia militia officer. George Washington was so conservative that he felt that that should be the American uniform, and the U.S. Army has stayed with the blue dress uniform to this day. But the original reason for blue and red being chosen is they were inexpensive cloth. We have a last thing here that's uniquely American, and this would be a regular militiaman, a local militiaman, that may not have had a uniform, so they took a work garment. Farmers and other tradesmen would wear over smocks to protect their expensive clothing going out to work, to keep cow dung and thistles and thorns off their good clothing. And one of the other things that they developed is what we call a hunting shirt today, where they put a cape on it. This cape could be functional. If his belts were underneath the cape and it was wet, he could throw it up over the back of his head to stay warm. This is also a derivation of a shirt that the Native Americans used. And so hunting shirts became a popular, uniquely American garment that only show up on this side of the Atlantic. And during the War of 1812, this is used. They were used in a minimal way in the American Revolution and by some of the troops afterward. George Washington thought it was a practical, inexpensive garment and that everybody should have it. The U.S. Army experimented with their rifle corps. But militiamen wore this type of garment even up to the beginning of the American Civil War. Other things that he's carrying that's more unique to a local militia rather than a uniformed militiaman, he's got a butcher knife, a utilitarian knife. That can be used for all kinds of things. Some of them that are traded to our natives, if they're not our allies, they might be using it to take scalps. He also is carrying a tomahawk or utility axe. The militia law of 1792 states that every white male between 18 and 45 must own a musket, a cartridge box that holds 24 rounds of ammunition, a knapsack, a quarter-pound of powder, and if he doesn't have a bayonet for his musket, he has to have a tomahawk. So this gentleman actually is well armed that he has both. And again, this is just a baggy, simply utilitarian garment. It's been dyed naturally with indigo blue to try to, again, simulate a more military look.
What's on the top of his hat? Like, what's that called?
That is actually a feather plume. And again, white indicates infantry. One of the other things that I'd like to show is, see that little round thing on my hat? It's called a cockade. Now, you would wear a leather cockade or a ribbon on your hat to show what nationality you were, even if you're a civilian. So if you're traveling abroad, if I were to see a white ribbon on there, they'd know that I was a French monarchist. If I had a blue and white one, for instance, they'd know I was a Bavarian, etc., etc. Austrians, orange and black. Well, remember I said George Washington was pretty conservative, right? Black represents the House of Hanover. Anyone ever hear that before? You know where Hanover is? Anyone? Germany. Anyone know where King George I, II, and III were from? Hanover. As a result, as British subjects, all colonists wore a cockade showing they were loyal subjects to the crown. Well, when we had this argument with the mother country about representation, there was never any intention to be a free and independent country. The armed insurrection, which became our American War of Independence, nobody thought about changing the loyalty of the cockade. It wasn't until we had an alliance with France at the end of the war that we added some white ribbon. But what happened in the 1790s in France? Anybody? Revolution. The white cockade goes away. Well, at the same time that white cockade goes away, people start saying that are traveling overseas, we need a uniquely American cockade because they think that we're loyal subjects to the crown. But it's a new republic. What happens in a republic in a committee? Nothing. Everything goes real slow. So the discussion goes on and on and on, and by the time they decide the colors of the young republic are Well, who else has got red, white, and blue now? France. They got there first again. So by the time we decided we should have a red, white, and blue cockade, the French adopted red, white, and blue cockade, and we're almost at war with them, so we sure don't want that. So Washington looks around and he sees a brand new coin, because American money's brand new too. And one of the prettiest coins we ever made was actually designed by a Hungarian immigrant, Morris First. And that is a silver coin that has an eagle on clouds, and its talons on one side has arrows, and the other side are olive branches. It's actually very pretty. And he says, why don't we take the design from that coin and put it in the center of our cockade? And guess what? Anyone look at the presidential seal today? All those same devices are still there. The U.S. Army flag, it's still there. So that starts in the same period, about 1800 or so. Any other questions?